Kentucky is a state steeped in history, from Civil War battlefields to early settlements that shaped America's frontier. But beneath its rolling hills and quiet towns lies a darker side, a world where the past refuses to stay buried. Tonight, we journey into the shadows, exploring 20 of Kentucky's most haunted graveyards, places where spirits linger, whispers echo through the night, and the dead seem to refuse eternal rest. Gather close, keep your lights dim, and prepare for a journey into eerie silence, cold winds, and chilling stories that will make the hairs on your neck stand up. Old Frankfort Cemetery sits high on a hill overlooking Kentucky's capital city, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches sway with the weight of history. Established in 1844, this hallowed ground holds the remains of governors, soldiers, and countless citizens who helped shape the early identity of the state. From its stone walls, one can see the Kentucky River winding below, calm, almost indifferent to the countless souls that have found their rest above its banks. Yet for all its serenity by daylight, the old Frankfort Cemetery changes when the sun sinks beneath the horizon. Its quiet becomes heavy, the shadows deepen, and the whispers of the past seem to rise on the night breeze. Many who have visited after dusk describe an unsettling feeling that they are not alone. The cemetery is not just a collection of graves. It is a place where memory clings tightly, where echoes of grief and triumph refuse to fade. Among the old monuments stand the graves of Civil War soldiers, men who once fought brother against brother. Some were Union loyalists, others Confederate sympathizers, though they now rest only a few feet apart. Visitors often speak of hearing faint footsteps pacing between their headstones, as if the soldiers are still on guard, forever trapped in the tension of their divided loyalties. One caretaker, who worked at the cemetery for over 2 decades, once told of hearing whispered conversations while tending to the grounds near the soldiers' section. He described the voices as low and urgent, like officers issuing quiet commands to their men. When he turned on his flashlight, the sounds would stop. Once, in the faint light of dawn, he noticed impressions in the dew-covered grass, boot prints, arranged in perfect formation, leading toward the central path and then vanishing entirely. There are other spirits said to walk these grounds. Among them is a woman often described as wearing a long 19th century dress, her face pale and her movements slow and graceful. Locals believe she is the ghost of a woman who died of heartbreak during the war, perhaps mourning a husband or son who never returned from battle. The most famous encounter with her occurred one autumn evening when a lone visitor wandered through the cemetery at twilight. He was a historian, drawn by curiosity rather than fear, and he lingered near the governor's monument as the air grew colder. That was when he noticed her, a figure in gray silk, gliding silently between the stones. At first, he thought she might be another late visitor, perhaps a reenactor or a mourner. But as he stepped closer, he realized that the woman's gown was illuminated by no source of light, and that her feet made no sound upon the gravel path. He called out to her, but she did not turn. Instead, she drifted past a marble monument and seemed to dissolve into the air itself. All that remained was the faint scent of roses, so strong and sudden that it made him pause. The smell lingered for several minutes before fading, leaving only the crisp scent of autumn leaves behind. Others have since claimed to encounter the same fragrance in that very spot, a fleeting perfume that appears without warning, often followed by a soft, rustling sound, as though a gown were brushing against the ground. The legend of the Lady of the Roses, as she is now called, has become part of the cemetery's lore, passed quietly between caretakers, historians, and ghost hunters who come to investigate the old burial ground. There are also reports of phantom lanterns flickering among the trees late at night, their light moving in slow, deliberate arcs. Some believe these lights belong to the spirits of soldiers who still patrol the cemetery's boundaries, searching for their lost comrades. Paranormal investigators who have spent nights within the gates report capturing faint voices on electronic recordings, words that seem to say, "March" or "Ready." On cold nights, thermal cameras have shown brief heat signatures that vanish as soon as they are approached, leaving investigators both excited and unnerved. Visitors during the day often notice the uneasy stillness of certain sections, Near the older graves, the air seems to thicken, as though the passage of time slows. The chirping of birds and the hum of insects fade away, replaced by an unnatural quiet. Tourists who come to photograph the beautiful monuments sometimes find strange misty shapes appearing in their pictures, long streaks of light or semi-transparent silhouettes hovering near the stones. Skeptics dismiss them as tricks of light or humidity. But those who have felt the cold air brush against their skin in the middle of summer know the truth feels far stranger. The cemetery's most famous resident is Daniel Boone, Kentucky's legendary frontiersman, whose grave draws thousands of visitors each year. Yet even near Boone's resting place, the strange occurrences persist. Some visitors have seen shadowy figures standing among the nearby trees, only for them to vanish when approached. Others have heard the sound of distant drumming, a slow, steady rhythm that echoes faintly before disappearing into the wind. One evening, a group of college students from Frankfurt decided to visit the cemetery to test the local ghost stories for themselves. They brought cameras, flashlights, and recording devices, laughing as they entered the gates. But as the night deepened, their laughter turned to nervous silence. Near the old section where the soldiers were buried, one student claimed to see a faint blue glow rising from the ground. Another heard what she described as whispers that weren't in English. When they played back their recordings later, they discovered a chilling sound beneath their own voices, the unmistakable rhythm of marching footsteps. Old Frankfurt Cemetery remains a place of beauty, history, and quiet dread. It stands as a reminder that the past never fully releases its hold, that the echoes of tragedy can cling to a place long after the mourners have gone. By day, it is a serene memorial to the lives that helped shape Kentucky's story. But when night falls and the mist curls around the gravestones, it becomes something else. A world caught between the living and the dead, where whispers carry across the still air and unseen eyes seem to watch from the darkness. Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky, is one of the most strikingly beautiful burial grounds in America, a sweeping landscape of winding roads, weeping willows, ornate tombs, and peaceful lakes. Established in 1848, it serves as the final resting place for more than 130,000 souls, including veterans from every major American war, prominent politicians, industrialists, and even legendary figures like Colonel Harlan Sanders, founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yet, beneath its refined and serene exterior lies an atmosphere heavy with mystery and sorrow, one that has led many to believe Cave Hill is haunted far beyond its picturesque charm. By day, Cave Hill feels like a park, calm and reverent. The sunlight spills through the leaves, the air hums with birdsong, and the marble monuments gleam. But as dusk descends, the tone of the cemetery transforms. The shadows deepen. The air seems to grow colder. Locals and night shift security guards tell stories of ghostly whispers drifting through the trees, of footsteps echoing on gravel paths long after the last visitor has left. For those who have experienced it firsthand, Cave Hill After Dark is not just a cemetery. It is a threshold between the living and the dead. One of the oldest legends surrounding Cave Hill speaks of the calling voices. People walking near the older sections of the cemetery late at night have reported hearing their names spoken softly from the darkness. The voice often sounds familiar, a friend, a relative, or even their own inner thought, but it comes from nowhere visible. Some have followed the sound only to find themselves standing alone before an unmarked grave, the air still and cold as stone. A few witnesses have described the feeling as hypnotic, as if the voice is drawing them closer, beckoning them toward something unseen. Security guards, whose job it is to patrol the sprawling grounds after hours, have their own chilling tales. One guard, who worked the night shift in the 1990s, told of an encounter that still haunts him. While doing his routine inspection near the older Civil War section, he noticed a faint movement by one of the graves. A man crouched low, digging into the earth with his bare hands. Thinking it was a vandal or perhaps someone deranged, the guard shouted for the man to stop and began running toward him. But as he drew closer, the figure stood up, turned slightly, and in the pale moonlight the guard saw a hollow, dirt-smeared face, eyes blank and expressionless. The figure simply stared for a moment, before fading into the ground itself, leaving only a disturbed patch of earth behind. When the guard called for backup, no one found any sign of fresh digging or footprints. The soil was undisturbed. The guard quit his job a week later. Over the years, countless visitors have captured strange anomalies in photographs taken at Cave Hill. Misty forms rising from behind headstones, translucent shapes that seem to hover beside monuments, orbs of light floating near the old mausoleums. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site describe it as one of the most spiritually active places in Kentucky. Many claim the sheer number of burials, thousands spanning over a century, has created an environment charged with emotional energy, a place where the veil between the physical and spiritual world is unusually thin. The old Confederate section is said to be particularly active. Here, rows of identical gravestones mark the final resting places of soldiers who died far from home. Visitors have heard the clinking of metal, the murmur of men's voices, and even the faint sound of drums echoing from nowhere. Some say the soldiers still stand watch in the afterlife, guarding their fallen comrades as they did in life. On cold winter nights, passing drivers have reported seeing shadowy figures standing along the road just outside the cemetery walls, men in tattered uniforms who vanish when approached. One of the most unsettling areas of Cave Hill is near the lake, where an old stone bridge crosses the water. Locals call it the Bridge of Echoes, because many who have walked across it at night swear they hear faint footsteps behind them, matching their own pace, but slightly delayed. Sometimes, when they stop, the footsteps continue. Others have seen shapes moving on the opposite bank, silhouettes that seem human but glide rather than walk. A visitor once described seeing a woman in Victorian mourning clothes standing beside the water, gazing into her own reflection. When he called out to her, she turned her head, and he saw that her face was pale as marble and her eyes completely black. She vanished a moment later, leaving ripples across the still surface of the lake. Caretakers and groundskeepers, despite their familiarity with the cemetery, admit that there are parts of Cave Hill they prefer to avoid after dark. One longtime employee said he often hears what sounds like soft weeping coming from the family mausoleums, especially on foggy nights. Another recalled hearing the faint strains of organ music echoing from somewhere deep within the grounds, even though there are no chapels or open buildings nearby. Visitors who come to pay respects at Colonel Sanders' grave have reported seeing a man in an old-fashioned suit standing quietly a few yards away. When they approach to greet him or ask for directions, he disappears. Some believe this spirit could be that of Sanders himself, continuing to watch over his legacy, though others suspect it might be an entirely different presence drawn to the attention his grave attracts. In another incident, a photographer exploring the cemetery at dawn captured an image of a figure standing behind a large angel statue. The figure appeared solid, a man in early 20th century clothing. But when the photographer looked up from his camera, no one was there. The image, later examined by local paranormal researchers, showed no signs of manipulation. What makes Cave Hill so eerie isn't just its hauntings, but its juxtaposition of beauty and death. The rolling hills, the ornate sculptures, the ponds reflecting moonlight, they create a sense of peace that almost disguises the restless energy beneath. It's as if the cemetery itself is alive, breathing softly through the rustling of leaves, whispering through the stone corridors of memory. Many believe the haunting of Cave Hill is not malevolent. The spirits that linger are not angry, they are simply unwilling to leave, bound by love, duty, or sorrow. They call out not to frighten, but perhaps to be remembered. Still, for those who wander its winding paths after the gates close, beauty and terror become inseparable. The disembodied voices that whisper your name, the flickering shadows that move where no one stands. They remind you that even the most peaceful places can hold a deep and ghostly life of their own. Eastern Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky, is one of the city's oldest burial grounds, a place steeped in both history and heartbreak. Established in 1848, it was meant to be a dignified resting place for Louisville's citizens, a sanctuary of quiet reflection. But over the years, the cemetery became notorious for scandal, decay, and stories that stretched beyond the grave. Time has not been kind to Eastern Cemetery, nor, it seems, have the restless spirits who linger among its crumbling tombstones. For generations, locals have whispered that something is not right about the place. Even from the street, the atmosphere feels heavy. The air hangs still between the leaning gravestones. The trees seem to swallow light, and a chill settles over anyone who dares to wander inside after sunset. Eastern Cemetery's reputation for being haunted is not born from imagination alone. Beneath its soil lies a dark past, one that might explain why so many believe the dead here cannot rest. In the 1980s, investigators uncovered a shocking truth. Cemetery officials had been reusing graves for decades. Bodies were buried on top of other bodies, sometimes 3 or 4 deep. Coffins were moved, bones were displaced, and graves were resold to unsuspecting families. It is estimated that nearly 100,000 people are buried in an area meant to hold less than half that number. The scandal made national headlines, and many believe it left behind a spiritual wound, a permanent scar that lingers in the soil and echoes through the night air. Visitors who walk the overgrown paths often describe the same unsettling sensations: the feeling of being watched, the sudden drop in temperature, and the faint murmur of voices that seem to drift between the graves. Some have claimed that the headstones move overnight, shifting subtly as if rearranged by unseen hands. Entire rows appear different in the morning light, the names and markers slightly out of alignment. Groundskeepers have tried to explain it away as weather, erosion, or vandalism. But locals insist it happens too often, too deliberately, to be random. One of the most common reports from Eastern Cemetery is the sound of crying. It is not loud or dramatic, but soft and sorrowful, like someone mourning in the distance. The sound often seems to come from empty plots, spaces with no visible graves or markers. Paranormal investigators have tried to track its source, setting up recorders and thermal cameras, only to capture faint sobs that fade into silence. Those who have heard it in person describe it as deeply human, a sound that chills the blood because it carries genuine emotion, as though the spirits themselves are weeping for their forgotten resting places. Among all the legends that haunt Eastern Cemetery, none is more widely told than that of the ghostly child. Visitors, particularly those who come near dusk, speak of seeing a small figure wandering among the headstones, a boy or girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, dressed in clothing from another century. The child is said to appear near the entrance or along the older sections where the grass grows thick and the stones are cracked. Some have seen the apparition standing still, watching quietly. Others report feeling a gentle tug on their coat or pant leg, as though a small hand were trying to lead them somewhere. One woman who visited the cemetery in late autumn recounted her experience with the child's ghost. She had been taking photographs of the old monuments when she felt something brush against the hem of her coat. Looking down, she saw no one. Moments later, she heard soft footsteps on the gravel path behind her, quick, light, and uneven, like a child running. When she turned around, she saw a small figure dart between 2 headstones. Thinking it might be a lost child, she followed, calling out, but the figure vanished. She stopped near the edge of the wooded area that borders the cemetery and caught a faint giggle, innocent, yet echoing from nowhere. Others have reported similar encounters. Some claim the child tries to lead them toward the deeper woods that border the cemetery's edge. Those who follow too far often report getting disoriented, as though the paths shift around them. The trees close in, and the air grows thick with silence. When they finally find their way back, they realize they've wandered far from where they began, with no memory of how long they were gone. One visitor described it as though time itself seemed to pause, the world outside forgotten until he stepped back into the clearing. Not all the hauntings at Eastern Cemetery are gentle. Paranormal teams who have spent nights inside report batteries draining instantly, cold spots that move as though following them, and shadows that flicker at the corners of their vision. One investigator described seeing a dark figure rise from the ground near a broken monument and then dissolve into mist. Another captured an EVP, an electronic voice phenomenon, in which a raspy voice whispered, "Leave us be." Many residents of Louisville avoid the cemetery altogether after sunset. Even during the day, the atmosphere feels oppressive, as though the place is saturated with grief. The silence is often broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant hum of traffic, sounds that seem almost out of place among the forgotten graves. Some say the sorrow of those buried atop one another, without peace or proper rest, has created an echo that can be silenced. The history of desecration, combined with the countless unmarked graves, fuels the belief that Eastern Cemetery is a place where spirits are trapped, confused, or angry. Some who have visited describe feeling waves of sadness so intense they had to leave. Others have reported sudden headaches or dizziness near certain plots, as if the very ground radiated distress. Skeptics might blame suggestion or imagination, but those who stood there alone, surrounded by the shifting shadows, would argue otherwise. On moonless nights, people driving past the gates have claimed to see faint lights moving through the cemetery, lantern-like glows that drift just above the ground. They vanish when approached, and sometimes, if the night is still enough, a soft cry can be heard, carried on the wind, fading in and out like the breath of the dead themselves. Lexington Cemetery in Lexington, Kentucky, is one of the most beautiful and historically significant cemeteries in the state. A vast expanse of manicured lawns, majestic trees, and winding cobblestone paths. Established in 1849, it was designed to be more than a burial ground. It was envisioned as a garden of remembrance, a place where life and death could coexist in quiet harmony. By day, it is serene, radiant even, with sunlight spilling over the monuments and reflecting off the gentle ponds that dot its landscape. But when night falls, Lexington Cemetery becomes something else entirely, a place where whispers ride the wind and history itself seems to stir beneath the earth. Those who have wandered its paths after dark speak of an eerie stillness that feels almost alive. The rustling leaves, the creak of tree limbs, the faint hum of insects, they all seem to fade, replaced by an uncanny silence that presses in from every direction. Many have reported hearing footsteps echoing across the old cobblestone walkways, crisp, deliberate steps that follow behind them, keeping perfect pace, though no one can be seen. The sound stops whenever they turn to look, resuming again only when they start to walk away. Some describe it as unnerving, but strangely rhythmic, like a soldier marching in the distance. The cemetery is home to thousands of graves, including soldiers who fought in the Civil War. Their presence is deeply felt. During the day, tourists can visit the section dedicated to the fallen, where weathered stones stand in perfect rows, each bearing the name of a life cut short. But at night, those same stones seem to cast longer shadows, and the air grows colder around them. Visitors have spoken of seeing faint figures standing among the graves, men in old gray or blue uniforms, their faces half hidden beneath caps, watching silently before fading into the mist. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a couple who visited the cemetery one late evening in early autumn. They had stopped by after dinner to take a quiet walk, unaware that the gates would soon close. The sun was slipping below the horizon, and the last light of day painted the tombstones gold and gray. As they made their way down one of the older paths, the woman noticed movement ahead, a lone figure kneeling before a grave. She nudged her husband, and they both stopped. The man was dressed in what looked like an old military uniform, his back hunched, his shoulders shaking as if in silent grief. His coat was torn, and the fabric appeared soaked with mud. At first they thought he might be part of some reenactment, or perhaps a caretaker in costume. But the air around them had gone deathly still. The woman called out softly, asking if he was all right. The figure didn't move. He simply stayed kneeling, head bowed. The couple took a few steps closer, their footsteps crunching against the gravel path. When they were only a few yards away, the man suddenly turned his head toward them. His face was pale, streaked with dirt, and his eyes seemed almost hollow. Then, without a sound, he vanished, dissolving into thin air. The woman later said the moment he disappeared, a cold wind rushed past him, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Her husband claimed he heard a faint whisper, something like "I'm home," carried away on the breeze. Both swore that the grave he knelt before was marked with the name of a young soldier who died in 1863. Such sightings are not uncommon in Lexington Cemetery. Security guards who patrol the grounds after closing often speak of seeing shapes moving in the distance, especially near the older military sections. One guard described watching what appeared to be a man walking with a lantern between the tombstones. Thinking it was a trespasser, he followed, only to find that the light moved faster and faster before abruptly vanishing behind a row of graves. When he reached a spot, there was nothing there, no footprints, no lantern. Just a faint smell of smoke and the distant sound of what he described as boots marching on gravel. The cemetery's large pond is also a source of strange activity. On still nights, visitors claim to see reflections in the water that do not match what stands above, silhouettes of people where none can be found flickering, candlelight drifting across the surface, and once even a faint outline of a horse and rider moving silently along the opposite shore. Some believe this phantom rider is connected to the Civil War as well, perhaps a fallen cavalry officer whose spirit still roams the grounds. But not all the ghosts of Lexington Cemetery are soldiers. Many believe that the cemetery's beauty and its deep emotional history make it a place where all kinds of spirits linger. Gardeners who tend to the flowers have reported hearing laughter near the children's section, a soft, joyful sound that fades as quickly as it appears. Visitors placing flowers on graves sometimes find their offerings moved or disturbed by mourning, as if someone unseen had examined them during the night. Others have described catching glimpses of a woman in black walking along the main path, her veil fluttering behind her. She never speaks, but her presence is often followed by the faint scent of lilacs. One particularly chilling story comes from a college student who was photographing the cemetery for an art project. While reviewing his pictures later, he noticed a figure standing near one of the grand mausoleums, a tall man in a long coat, facing away from the camera. In the next frame, taken only seconds later, the figure was gone. The student returned to the same spot the following day and discovered the inscription on the mausoleum. It belonged to a Union officer killed in battle. Locals say that the spirits of Lexington Cemetery are not malevolent. They are echoes, memories of devotion, duty, and loss that have imprinted themselves upon the land. The cemetery is so old and so deeply tied to the region's past that it seems natural for such energy to remain. Those who visit after dark describe the atmosphere not as terrifying, but deeply melancholic, like stepping into a place where time has folded upon itself. Still, few dare to linger once the gates close. As the night deepens and the moon rises over the marble monuments, the cemetery grows impossibly quiet. The air turns cold, and faint footsteps echo once again along the cobblestones, footsteps that do not belong to the living. Some say if you listen closely, you can hear a lone soldier kneeling in prayer, whispering to the grave of a comrade who never made it home. Others say that the spirits here guard their resting place with eternal vigilance, bound by love and loyalty that even death cannot erase. Rose Hill Cemetery in Lexington, Kentucky, is a place where beauty and sorrow blend seamlessly. Established in the 1800s, it was meant to be a peaceful resting ground for some of the city's earliest settlers, a place of eternal calm beneath towering oaks and marble angels. By day, the cemetery seems tranquil, almost poetic, sunlight filtering through the leaves, the faint hum of wind across the grass, and the elegant stone monuments that tell the stories of generations long gone. But when night descends, Rose Hill transforms. Its quiet beauty takes on a darker tone, and the weight of centuries seems to settle into the air. Those who visit after dark often describe an unmistakable presence, that of the weeping woman, a spirit so mournful and haunting that her sorrow seems to echo through the entire cemetery. The legend of the weeping woman of Rose Hill has been whispered for decades. Locals say she appears near an old family plot in the southeastern corner of the cemetery, standing silently among the graves. Always dressed in black, with a long veil that obscures her face, she is most often seen beneath the pale light of a full moon. Her posture is unmistakable, slightly hunched, her head bowed as though in endless grief. And though she never speaks, those who have seen her say they can feel her sadness radiating through the night air, heavy and suffocating. Many who encounter her report that her tears glimmer unnaturally in the moonlight, shining like tiny fragments of glass. Some say they fall and vanish before touching the ground. Others claim they leave damp marks on the grass, evidence that whatever she is, her sorrow carries weight in both worlds. Witnesses describe feeling a chill sweep through them the moment they see her, followed by an overwhelming sense of loss, as if they are mourning something they cannot name. The first recorded account of the weeping woman dates back to the late 19th century. A caretaker, making his nightly rounds, spotted a woman dressed in mourning clothes standing near a large family monument. Thinking she was a late visitor who had stayed past closing time, he approached to ask her to leave. When he was only a few feet away, the woman lifted her head slightly, revealing a pale face streaked with tears that shimmered like dew. The caretaker froze, and before he could speak again, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the faint scent of lilies. The next morning, he returned to the spot and found the grass wet as if from rain, though the sky had been clear all night. When he touched the ground, it felt cold to the point of pain. He later quit his job, insisting he had seen real sorrow made flesh. His story spread through town, and soon others began to visit the cemetery in hopes of witnessing the apparition for themselves. One of the most famous modern encounters occurred in the early 1990s. A group of college students visited Rose Hill late at night, armed with flashlights and a camera. They made their way toward the older section where the weeping woman was said to appear. As they reached the plot, one student pointed out a figure standing among the stones. The woman was motionless, her black gown trailing behind her like smoke. They called out, thinking she might be an actress or a prankster, but she did not move. When one of them raised a flashlight, the beam illuminated her face, pale, hollow, and glistening with tears. Terrified, they turned to run, but when they looked back moments later, the woman was gone. When the students developed their film later, one of the photographs showed a faint outline of the figure, surrounded by a misty haze. Around her, the camera had captured strange light distortions, streaks that seemed to form the shape of falling tears. Even skeptics admitted the image was difficult to explain. Over time, more stories surfaced. Some claim the weeping woman follows those who see her, her sorrow attaching itself like a shadow. Visitors have reported feeling inexplicable sadness for days after leaving Rose Hill, dreams filled with images of funerals, distant crying, or an unseen presence standing beside their bed. A local historian once described visiting the cemetery to document old graves and feeling an overwhelming sense of despair. When he passed a supposed family plot, he said it felt as though the air itself was mourning. He left abruptly, unable to finish his work. There are many theories about who the weeping woman might be. Some believe she is the ghost of a mother who lost her entire family to an epidemic in the 1800s. Others claim she is a widow who never recovered from the loss of her husband in the Civil War, visiting his grave every night until she died. Another story tells of a woman buried alive by mistake, her spirit forever weeping for the life stolen from her. No one can say for sure, but every tale carries the same core: endless grief and love that refuse to die. On certain nights, especially around anniversaries of historical tragedies, paranormal investigators claim the energy in the cemetery grows stronger. EMF detectors spike near the weeping woman's plot, and recordings capture faint sobbing or whispering. One team reported hearing a woman's voice pleading, "Help me find them," though no one else was present. Another captured a chilling photograph of what appeared to be a faint, glowing figure kneeling beside a headstone. Despite its haunting reputation, Rose Hill Cemetery remains a place of beauty. Families still visit during the day, placing flowers and paying respects. Yet, for those who know its darker history, the sense of peace never fully settles. The air carries a quiet melancholy, and even the sunlight seems muted. As evening approaches, the cemetery grows strangely still, as though the earth itself holds its breath. Those who have seen the weeping woman say she does not intend harm. Her sadness is deep, but it is not violent. It is longing, eternal mourning for something lost long ago. And yet, her presence leaves a mark. People who encounter her often speak of being changed, more aware of life's fragility, more sensitive to sorrow that lingers unseen. It is as if her grief becomes part of them, reminding them of the thin veil that separates love from loss, life from death. Riverside Cemetery in Madisonville rests quietly on the edge of town, a tranquil sanctuary by day. Locals often say that when the night fog creeps across the grounds, the dead at Riverside begin to stir, not in body, but in spirit. The cemetery, dating back to the mid-1800s, holds the remains of generations of townsfolk, Civil War soldiers, and forgotten souls whose names have long faded from their stones. It's a place where memory and mystery intertwine, and where silence itself seems alive. Visitors who wander through the gates after dark often describe an uncanny pressure in the air, as if unseen eyes are watching. The grave markers, some tilted and broken with age, catch the faint glimmer of moonlight like crooked teeth rising from the earth. Locals swear that on windless nights, low murmurs drift through the air, whispers that seem to carry from every direction. Some describe it as prayer, others as chanting. There's one particularly old section of the cemetery, tucked deep among overgrown trees and ivy-covered headstones. It's where most of the Civil War dead were buried, soldiers from both the Union and the Confederacy. According to town records, a small field hospital once stood nearby, and many of those who died there were interred hastily in mass graves. Over the years, stories have grown about ghostly soldiers who still patrol their resting place, their boots echoing faintly against the dirt paths, their shadows flickering between the trees. One night, not long ago, a man named Darren, a lifelong resident of Madisonville and a self-proclaimed skeptic, decided to test the legends for himself. He had heard the tales since childhood, but never believed them. Armed with a flashlight and his phone camera, he entered Riverside just after midnight. The air was heavy, humid, and still. The moment he crossed the old iron gate, his flashlight flickered once and dimmed. He brushed it off as bad batteries and kept walking. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The sound of crickets faded. His boots crunched softly on gravel until he reached the older section of the cemetery. There, the ground was uneven, and the stones leaned toward one another like weary shoulders. A faint mist hovered just above the grass. Darren stopped to take a picture of a large stone angel that loomed over several graves. As he raised his camera, he noticed movement in the corner of his eye, a shape, darker than the surrounding night, kneeling near a sunken plot, his breath caught in his throat. The figure appeared to be digging. Its motions were slow, deliberate, its hands scooping at the earth with disturbing calm. For a moment, Darren thought it might be a person vandalizing a grave. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized something was wrong. The figure's hands weren't disturbing the soil at all. They were passing through it, heart pounding. He stepped closer, his flashlight trembling in his grip. When the beam touched the figure, it paused and slowly lifted its head. The light revealed the face of a man, gaunt, pale, and smeared with what looked like mud. He wore the tattered remains of a soldier's uniform, the kind Darren had seen in Civil War exhibits. The man's eyes were hollow, but they glowed faintly, like embers fading in ash. Frozen with terror, Darren could only stare. Then, behind the ghostly figure, he noticed something else, another body lying motionless atop the grave mound. The soldier's remains, perfectly preserved, though no grave robber had disturbed them, rested in a posture of eternal exhaustion, his skeletal hands still clutching a rusted rifle. The kneeling figure turned to look at the corpse, then back at Darren, as though guarding the body even in death. Before Darren could react, the air grew cold enough to burn. The mist thickened around him, curling up his legs like smoke. The soldier stood, rising slowly, impossibly tall. Darren stumbled backward, tripping over a stone. His flashlight clattered to the ground, the beam cutting wildly through the fog. When he scrambled to his feet and looked again, both figures, the kneeling man and the body, were gone. Only the grave remained, untouched, with the old headstone leaning at the same weary angle as before. He ran from the cemetery, the whispers growing louder behind him, like a chorus of faint voices calling him back. When he finally burst through the gates, he collapsed under a street lamp, gasping for breath. He swore he could still smell the scent of damp soil and gunpowder clinging to his clothes. Since that night, Darren refuses to speak publicly about what he saw, but friends say he's never been the same. He no longer walks near Riverside, even during the day. Some claim that if you pass by the cemetery late at night, you can still see him standing outside the fence, staring silently through the bars, as if something inside is calling his name. Visitors continue to report strange phenomena. Some hear distant drumming, like a slow march that fades when they turn to listen. Others claim to see shadowy figures near the Civil War section, their forms flickering like candlelight. On rare occasions, a soft sobbing sound drifts across the graves, though no one can ever find the source. Maple Grove Cemetery in Paducah sits hidden behind a cluster of overgrown trees and wild brush, the kind of place that even locals forget about until they happen to drive past it. Its iron gate is rusted, leaning at an odd angle, and the sign that once bore its name is now nearly unreadable, covered in moss and time. Though small and mostly neglected, the cemetery has become one of the region's most whispered about places, a site of strange lights, shifting shadows, and sounds that defy explanation. By day, Maple Grove looks like any other old burial ground. A few dozen stones lean unevenly across the grounds, some so weathered that the names are gone entirely. The air feels still, heavy, as though the land itself remembers more than it should. But it's after nightfall that the true atmosphere reveals itself, an unnatural stillness that seems to smother every sound, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of unseen weight moving through the dark. For generations, people in Paducah have told stories about the cemetery's ghostly lanterns. They appear without warning, dim lights that hover low to the ground, drifting along the main path as if carried by invisible hands. Some claim the lights belong to long-dead caretakers, still tending the grounds, while others believe they are restless spirits, searching for their own forgotten graves. What unnerves witnesses most is that when they try to approach, the lanterns don't fade or move away. They blink out instantly, without sound or trace, only to reappear a few yards behind the observer. One old man, a retired mail carrier named Lewis, swore that he encountered the lights in the late 1980s while cutting through the cemetery as a shortcut home. He said he saw 3 faint orbs moving side by side down the center path, flickering softly like candle flames. He thought perhaps they were kids playing with flashlights, but as he called out to them, the lights stopped. Then, slowly, they began to move toward him. He turned to leave, only to find that the exit gate behind him had disappeared into darkness. He ran forward, and when he finally broke free of the tree line, the lights vanished all at once. He never took that shortcut again. Despite its reputation, Maple Grove has long been a target for local teenagers seeking a thrill. In 2014, a group of 5 friends decided to prove that the cemetery's hauntings were nothing but stories. Armed with sleeping bags, a small lantern, and a portable speaker, they planned to camp in the center of the grounds overnight. They arrived just before midnight, joking and laughing as they set up near a weathered family plot. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. The night was cool and clear, the moonlight spilling gently over the graves. Then, one of them, a girl named Emily, noticed a faint sound. Footsteps. At first, she thought it was one of her friends wandering off to scare the group. But when she called out, no one answered. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling the perimeter of their little campsite. Everyone went silent. They could hear the sound of someone or something walking in a steady rhythm just beyond the reach of their lantern's glow. Trying to stay calm, one of the boys shined his flashlight into the darkness, sweeping it across the tombstones. Nothing moved, yet the footsteps persisted. The group huddled closer together, their joking long gone, their breaths short and shaky. Then, without warning, a second set of footsteps joined the first, heavier, closer, echoing across the stones. And then, another, and another. Within moments, the entire group could hear what sounded like dozens of feet moving around them, pacing in slow, perfect unison. The sound was deafening in its precision, like an invisible procession marching through the night. One of the boys, unable to stand it any longer, shouted into the darkness, demanding whoever was there to show themselves. The footsteps stopped. Silence fell so thick, it felt like the world had gone still. They waited, frozen, staring into the black. Then came the whisper. A faint voice, barely audible, drifted from behind one of the nearest graves. It said something they couldn't understand, a single word, drawn out and broken, like breath passing through dry leaves. Then another voice joined it, this one closer, whispering in a low, urgent tone. Soon, the air filled with dozens of overlapping murmurs, a chorus of whispers encircling the terrified group. The voices seemed to rise and fall in a rhythm, echoing the long-vanished chants of some forgotten ritual. Emily screamed, breaking the trance. They grabbed their things and ran, stumbling through the dark toward the gate. The footsteps resumed, faster this time, as though chasing them. One boy dropped the lantern in his panic, and it shattered, plunging them into pitch blackness. They didn't stop running until they reached the road. When they finally looked back, the cemetery was silent again. Later, they tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was an echo, or animals in the brush, or just their imaginations feeding off fear. But each of them admitted to hearing the same thing, dozens of synchronized steps, and those whispered voices that seemed to come from all directions. None of them ever returned to Maple Grove. Over the years, others have reported similar encounters. A photographer exploring the grounds one evening claimed his camera kept capturing strange streaks of light, even though he saw nothing with his naked eyes. Another visitor described feeling an icy hand brush against her shoulder, though she was completely alone. Some say that if you stand quietly by the main path after midnight, you'll feel the ground tremble beneath your feet, as if unseen figures are walking beside you. The people of Paducah have learned to respect Maple Grove. Most avoid it after sunset, though a few curious souls still venture near the gate to catch a glimpse of the phantom lanterns. They say the lights often appear just before a storm, glowing faintly between the tombstones like warnings from another world. St. John's Cemetery in Louisville lies quietly at the edge of the city, surrounded by ancient oaks and high stone walls. By day, it feels peaceful, a place of reflection and prayer, where sunlight filters through the trees and the marble statues cast soft shadows over the rows of headstones. But when night falls, that serenity takes on another meaning. Beneath the glow of the moon, St. John's Cemetery becomes a place of whispers, shadows, and inexplicable lights that seem to breathe in rhythm with the wind. Locals call it one of Louisville's most haunted sites, not for the violence of its spirits, but for their persistence. The cemetery dates back to the mid-19th century, established by the Catholic diocese as a sacred resting place for parishioners, priests, and nuns. Many of those buried there were immigrants who built the early churches and schools of the city. Their graves, some unmarked and others intricately carved with angels and crosses, form a patchwork of history and perhaps of lingering devotion. Over the decades, strange events have been reported with eerie consistency. Glowing lights drifting between graves, the faint murmur of Latin prayer echoing through the air, and fleeting figures dressed in sacks that vanish the instant one tries to look directly at them. One of the oldest stories dates back to the 1920s, when a caretaker named Patrick O'Donnell lived on site in a small stone cottage near the entrance. Patrick, a devout man who took his duties seriously, often worked long into the night. He claimed that, on several occasions, he saw faint orbs of blue and white light floating low above the ground, often hovering over specific graves. The lights would pulse gently, as if alive, before drifting into the air and disappearing among the trees. At first, he thought it was the lanterns of late visitors or the tricks of fog. But one night, when he approached the glowing figures, he saw that the lights were suspended above graves of priests who had died decades earlier, and though there was no wind, he swore he heard chanting, soft, rhythmic, unmistakably Latin. His account was dismissed by most at the time, but as years passed, visitors began reporting similar experiences. Some said the lights were shaped like human figures. Others saw only the glow. Many who walked the grounds after dark felt watched, not with menace, but with solemn attention, as though the dead were observing their trespass with quiet disapproval. In more recent years, paranormal investigators have visited the site, drawn by its reputation. During one such investigation, A team recorded what they described as Gregorian-like chanting coming from the old section of the cemetery. The sound was faint but clear, repeating in melodic tones. When the group followed the noise, it stopped abruptly, only to begin again several minutes later, from the opposite side of the grounds. No human presence was found, and the recordings captured nothing beyond the disembodied voices. The most chilling encounter, however, comes from a man named Daniel, a local historian who visited St. John Cemetery in 2006. Daniel often explored Louisville's old burial sites, searching for forgotten names and stories to include in his writing. On a quiet October evening, just before dusk, he walked through the cemetery's central path with a small notebook and camera in hand. The air was still and cool, the scent of damp leaves lingering after a recent rain. As he reached a section reserved for clergy, he noticed a figure kneeling beside one of the older graves. The man wore a long black cassock, his head bowed as if in prayer. Assuming it was a priest paying respects, Daniel didn't want to intrude, so he stood quietly several yards away. But something about the scene felt strange. The man wasn't moving. His posture was rigid, frozen. Daniel waited, but the figure remained utterly still. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. He took a cautious step forward, the gravel crunching under his shoe. At that moment, the kneeling figure lifted its head slowly, unnaturally, and turned slightly to the side. Daniel froze, breath caught in his throat. Then, before he could react, he felt two icy hands close firmly on his shoulders from behind. He spun around instantly, heart pounding, but no one was there. The path behind him was empty. When he turned back, the figure at the grave was gone. Only the faint smell of burning incense lingered in the air. Daniel fled the cemetery that evening, shaken to his core. He later returned during the day to confirm what he'd seen, and found the same grave marked with the name of Father Matthias O'Connor, a priest who had died in 1878. Local church records listed him as a beloved figure who had spent decades tending to the poor, a man known for holding midnight vigils for the souls of the departed. Some now believe his spirit still keeps watch over the cemetery, forever praying for those who have joined him. Stories like Daniel's have multiplied over the years. Visitors report seeing shadowy figures standing near the mausoleum, their outlines faintly illuminated as if by candlelight. Some hear the sound of rosary beads clinking together in the dark, or catch the smell of incense even when no mass is being held nearby. One couple who visited late one evening said they heard footsteps behind them, measured and deliberate, like a procession. But when they turned, no one was there, only a trail of mist gliding along the path. Those who have dared to enter the cemetery after midnight often describe an overwhelming sense of reverence rather than fear. The hauntings of St. John's seem less about anger or unrest, and more about devotion, as though the spirits that remain are still bound by their faith. The lights that drift among the graves are said to move toward the large marble cross at the cemetery's center, gathering there before vanishing, as if drawn to something sacred. Today, St. John's Cemetery remains active, though few visit after dark. The Archdiocese maintains it with quiet care, and even they acknowledge the legends that surround it. Some priests bless the grounds annually, while others quietly admit they have felt the presence of something beyond comprehension while walking there at night. Highland Cemetery in Fort Mitchell stands high on a hill, its gates overlooking the quiet streets and neighborhoods below. During the day, it seems peaceful, a place of solemn beauty, where rows of marble headstones glint beneath the sunlight and the wind moves softly through the oaks and maples that line the hill. But when the sun sets, Highland takes on a far different presence. The silence deepens, the shadows lengthen, and those who have walked its paths after dark say that something unseen walks with them. The cemetery dates back to the mid-1800s and serves as the final resting place for generations of families from northern Kentucky. Civil War veterans, early settlers, and local leaders all lie beneath its soil, their histories carved into weathered stone. Yet, for all its history, the true stories people remember are not the ones engraved on graves. They are the ones whispered by ghost hunters and late-night visitors, stories of phantom voices, shifting shadows, and a presence that never quite reveals itself but always makes itself known. One of the most common reports comes from those who visit during quiet evenings, when the sky is clear and the town lights shimmer below. They say that if you stand near the older section of the cemetery, you can hear faint voices, soft and echoing, as if drifting through the air from nowhere. Some describe them as conversations, others as distant laughter or weeping. When investigators have tried to record them, their devices capture only static, followed by sudden bursts of sound, a few unintelligible words, a name whispered faintly, or a sigh that seems to come from inches away. The shadows are another matter entirely. People walking near the tree line at dusk often see dark shapes flitting between the trunks, human in form but utterly silent. One local ghost hunter described it as watching people move just beyond the edge of vision. When he turned on his flashlight, the figures vanished instantly, yet the beam illuminated footprints in the damp earth, leading toward the graves and stopping abruptly, as though whoever made them simply ceased to exist. Then there are the stories of movement, of headstones that seem to shift, lean, or even tremble when no wind stirs. Groundskeepers, used to the cemetery's strange moods, say it happens most often near the oldest graves on the western slope. They'll arrive in the morning to find certain stones tilted or displaced, though the soil around them remains undisturbed. One caretaker once joked that the dead at Highland were stretching their legs, but his tone changed after what happened in the summer of 1998. That year, a group of amateur ghost hunters spent a night at Highland, hoping to film evidence of supernatural activity. They brought with them cameras, recorders, and electromagnetic sensors. Around midnight, as they were setting up near a cluster of graves beneath a large oak, one of them, a man named Aaron, noticed something odd. The headstone nearest to him, a tall granite slab, appeared to be leaning slightly more than before. At first, he assumed it was a trick of the flashlight, but as he stared, the stone gave a faint creak, and then moved. It shifted forward an inch, maybe two, scraping against the soil with a dull grinding sound. Aaron froze. His friends, busy checking their equipment, didn't notice at first. He whispered for them to look, and when they turned, the headstone stopped. Cameras rolled, capturing nothing but stillness. Nervous laughter filled the air. Then, one of the others decided to touch it, just to prove it wasn't really moving. The moment his fingers brushed the stone, every flashlight blinked out at once. For nearly 10 seconds, they were engulfed in darkness. In that blackness, the group heard a low hum, like distant wind or a deep breath being drawn through the earth. And then faint but unmistakable came a voice. "Leave." The lights flickered back on. The headstone stood in the same place, but each of them swore the ground beneath their feet had vibrated slightly, as though something had stirred beneath it. They packed up their gear and left before sunrise, shaken and pale. None of them ever returned. Locals say that the spirits of Highland Cemetery are not malicious, only restless. The land itself, perched high above the town, seems to hold energy that refuses to fade. Some attribute the activity to the sheer age of the site, others to its proximity to old battlefields and routes once used by Union troops during the Civil War. There's even a legend that the hill was sacred ground to the native tribes who lived in the area long before the cemetery existed. One elderly resident, Mrs. McAllister, who lives just down the road from the gates, tells a story her grandmother passed down. She says that on certain foggy nights, the cemetery fills with lights, small, flickering orbs that move among the graves as though searching for something. Her grandmother used to call them soul lanterns, believing they were spirits wandering until they found peace. Once, as a child, Mrs. McAllister claims she saw them herself. She was looking out her bedroom window when she noticed a row of lights moving up the hill, one after another, in a slow, deliberate procession. They vanished at the top, just before dawn. Many visitors describe an overwhelming sensation when walking through Highland at night, a weight in the air, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Some say it's oppressive, others describe it as sorrowful, as if the cemetery itself carries a heavy grief. A few who dared to linger after midnight claim they felt a presence behind them, cold breath on the neck, the faintest brush of air. against the back of a hand or a whisper they couldn't quite make out. The cemetery's staff, used to these stories, tend to keep quiet about what they've experienced. One groundskeeper, however, once confided that he often heard footsteps following him during his early morning rounds. They would start softly, matching his pace, and stop whenever he did. The first time it happened, he turned to see who it was, but found no one. The second time, he didn't turn, he just whispered a prayer and kept walking until the sound faded. Calvary Cemetery in Louisville is a place of reverence and silence by day, but once the sun dips beyond the city skyline, a strange energy awakens among its stones. The air turns cold, the quiet becomes heavy, and the shadows grow deeper, as if the cemetery itself is breathing slow, deliberate, and haunted by memories too old to fade. Founded in the mid-19th century, Calvary is one of the city's oldest Catholic burial grounds, and while many come here to honor loved ones, some say not every soul beneath its soil has found peace. Locals whisper about the monks' figures from long ago, who once tended the grounds and guided the faithful through their final rites. They lived simple lives of devotion and silence. But stories say their spirits remain bound to Calvary, unable to leave their sacred duty behind. Visitors have described seeing robed silhouettes gliding between the graves, their heads bowed, faces lost in the darkness beneath heavy hoods. When approached, these monks simply fade, dissolving into mist before the startled eyes of the living. One woman, visiting her grandmother's grave late one autumn evening, claimed she heard the faint murmur of Latin prayers rising from the section reserved for clergy. Thinking she had stumbled upon a late-night vigil, she followed the sound, her candlelight trembling as the wind brushed past. The murmurs grew louder, rhythmic and solemn. Heci in aeternum dona es, the traditional prayer for the dead. But when she turned the corner, there was no one there. Only the faint outline of footprints pressed into the dew-damp grass, leading nowhere. Others have reported similar experiences. A maintenance worker, who'd been employed at the cemetery for nearly 2 decades, recalled one night when he stayed late repairing a fallen gate near the older mausoleums. Around midnight, as he packed up his tools, he noticed a cloaked man standing at the far end of the path, facing one of the tombs. Thinking it might be a mourner who'd snuck in after hours, he called out, but the man didn't move. The worker shined his flashlight in that direction and watched in disbelief as the beam passed right through the figure, revealing the stone cross behind it. The cloaked shadow turned, looked directly at him with eyes that reflected no light, and then simply vanished. The worker quit his shift early that night and refused to work in that section again after dark. Calvary Cemetery has also become a magnet for ghost hunters and local paranormal investigators. Many bring recording equipment, hoping to capture the whispers that so many have claimed to hear. One group from Louisville reported picking up clear audio of chanting during their late-night exploration, not random sounds, but full phrases in Latin, repeated several times. When the audio was analyzed, one of the phrases stood out, Ora pro nobis, pray for us. The group was unnerved by how distinct it was, and how it seemed to come from multiple voices, though the area had been completely deserted. There is a particular area of Calvary that visitors tend to avoid after sunset, a section where the graves are oldest and the stones lean with age. It's said that the ground here seems to hum faintly, especially in the early hours before dawn. Those who've walked this section at night claim to feel a sudden pressure, as though invisible eyes are watching from every angle. Some describe a chill that seeps into their bones, not the kind brought by wind, but the feeling of something standing too close. One young man recounted a night when he and his friends entered the cemetery as part of a dare. Armed with flashlights and a sense of bravado, they wandered among the graves, joking and snapping pictures. Everything was calm until they reached a section where the tombstones bore dates from the 1800s. The air suddenly turned icy, and their flashlights flickered simultaneously. Then, out of the darkness, they saw a procession, several dark-robed figures, each carrying what appeared to be a candle or lantern. The light they held flickered weakly, casting a golden hue that illuminated nothing beyond their outlines. The friends froze, unable to speak. The figures passed in silence, their footsteps making no sound. and as quickly as they appeared, they dissolved into the night. The group ran for the gates, vowing never to return. The haunting at Calvary Cemetery is not limited to monks alone. Some say they've seen other spirits, mourners who return to visit their loved ones, only to fade into the night before they reach the headstones. One recurring sighting involves a woman in a dark shawl who appears near the chapel, kneeling in prayer beside an unmarked grave. She never lifts her face, and when approached, the sound of quiet sobbing fills the air until she, too, vanishes. Even the sounds of bells have been heard here, faint tolls echoing through the still air long after the chapel's original bell was removed. The noise drifts over the graves, sometimes accompanied by the scent of incense, as though a funeral mass were still being conducted for those long forgotten. Skeptics suggest that the strange occurrences can be explained by wind, reflections, or imagination fueled by centuries of death and superstition. Yet those who have truly felt the chill of Calvary after midnight know better. They speak of an atmosphere too thick to be explained, of moments when time itself seems to bend, and the boundary between the living and the dead blurs just enough for the past to whisper through. Today, Calvary Cemetery remains a place of beauty and solemn remembrance. Its rolling hills, ornate monuments, and serene chapel give it a sense of peace during daylight hours. But beneath that calm exterior lies something else, an echo of devotion and unrest that refuses to fade. The monks who once prayed for eternal rest now seem to walk endlessly among the graves, perhaps still guarding the souls entrusted to them. And for those who linger too long after sunset, that devotion may still be felt in the rustle of robes, the faint hum of prayer, and the unmistakable chill of being watched by eyes from another world. Evergreen Cemetery in Southgate is a place of contrasts, serene by day, haunted by night. Sunlight filters through tall oaks and maples, illuminating the rows of marble and granite headstones that stretch across gentle hills. Visitors strolling among the graves often remark on the beauty of the grounds, the carefully trimmed grass, the soft chirping of birds, and the occasional deer crossing silently between the monuments. Yet beneath this calm exterior, the cemetery holds a different character, one that awakens after sunset, when the air grows colder and shadows deepen. Longtime residents speak of a presence at Evergreen that cannot be seen in daylight. Footsteps are often reported, echoing across empty paths. People tell stories of walking alone and suddenly sensing someone behind them. They pause, turn, and find nothing. No other visitors, no wandering animals, just the stillness of the night and the cold whisper of the wind through the trees. These footsteps seem to follow without moving, appearing to keep pace with their victims, yet disappearing whenever attention is drawn to them. One of the most vivid accounts comes from a woman named Clara, who had recently moved to Southgate. Drawn to the historic section of the cemetery, she arrived just before twilight, hoping to photograph the old monuments for her personal project. As the last rays of sun disappeared, she lingered near a centuries-old family plot. When she noticed it, a figure in a hooded robe gliding along the path between the gravestones. The movement was unnatural, smooth, silent, almost floating. Clara froze, her breath catching in her chest as the figure passed directly in front of her. The hooded figure vanished mid-step, as though swallowed by the night itself. Where it had been, the air smelled faintly of burning incense, a scent that lingered in the cool night breeze, clinging to Clara's hair and coat. She blinked, disoriented, and looked around for an explanation, perhaps a visitor leaving an evening vigil. But the cemetery was empty. The benches were vacant, the paths deserted. There was only the lingering aroma, and the sense that someone or something had passed through. Local legend suggests that Evergreen Cemetery is haunted by figures who have never truly left. Some say they are former caretakers, priests, or devout parishioners who remain bound to the sacred grounds they once tended. Others believe the spirits belong to those buried in the oldest section, restless souls who refuse to move on, tethered to their graves by unfinished business or unfulfilled vows. Over time, the cemetery has earned a reputation for sightings that seem impossible to explain, leaving skeptics and believers alike with a creeping unease. Ghost hunters are drawn to Evergreen, documenting its supernatural occurrences with cameras, recorders, and night vision equipment. Many report similar phenomena, cold spots that appear and vanish without reason, shadows that seem to move independently, and whispers of faint voices caught on audio devices. One team of investigators described the sensation of being followed by invisible presences, hearing footsteps circling their equipment while the graveyard remained otherwise silent. A maintenance worker, who has tended Evergreen for over 15 years, confided that he sometimes feels a presence hovering just behind him while he works alone at night. "It's like someone's there, watching," he said. "You'll feel it on your shoulders or down your neck, but when you turn, no one is there. It's unsettling, but it's part of the job now. You learn to ignore it, but you never really forget it." Some of the more frightening accounts involve visual sightings. Besides the hooded figure Clara encountered, others have described silhouettes appearing near monuments, sometimes flickering as if struggling to maintain form. A young man exploring the cemetery at midnight once claimed he saw a figure kneeling beside an old grave, completely still. He approached cautiously, and as he did, the figure's body seemed to ripple, like smoke twisting in the wind, before it disappeared entirely. Afterward, the man reported a lingering smell of incense and a chill that stayed with him for hours. Even during daytime visits, some feel the weight of the cemetery's past pressing against them. Locals say there is a subtle energy, a sensation that the eyes of the dead follow those who walk among them. The older monuments, some leaning precariously with age, seem to radiate a presence that cannot be ignored. Visitors who linger too long often describe an unexplained sadness, a pull toward certain graves, or the faint sound of something brushing across the grass. Evergreen's beauty seems to enhance its haunting qualities. The sunlight, the trees, and the gentle slopes make it appear idyllic, almost safe. But that contrast only deepens the unease when night falls. The familiar paths, so comforting by day, take on an uncanny aspect as the moonlight casts long shadows, and the figures of the unseen seem to emerge from the darkness. Footsteps, whispers, and faint lights make even brief visits feel like an intrusion into a realm that should remain untouched. Some scholars suggest the cemetery's history may explain part of its reputation. Established in the early 1800s, Evergreen has witnessed generations of grief, joy, and tragedy. Wars, epidemics, and personal loss have left their mark on the land, imprinting memory into the very soil. Some believe that strong emotions can linger, creating residual energy that manifests in strange ways for the living. Others think that certain spirits remain aware, actively moving through the cemetery and making their presence known to those sensitive enough to perceive them. Regardless of explanation, Evergreen Cemetery continues to draw attention. Its quiet beauty and storied history make it a destination for those interested in heritage, while its supernatural reputation draws thrill-seekers, paranormal enthusiasts, and those brave enough to test the stories for themselves. Many leave with nothing more than photographs, but others return with stories of whispers, shadows, and the undeniable feeling that they were not alone. Oddfellows Cemetery in Louisville has always carried a reputation that sets it apart from other burial grounds. Established in the 19th century, it is the resting place for members of the Independent Order of Oddfellows, a fraternal organization with roots in both charity and secretive rituals. But when darkness falls, the air changes, and the peaceful setting transforms into something that unsettles even the bravest visitors. Those who venture into Oddfellows Cemetery after dusk often speak of strange lights appearing where none should be. Candles are a common theme in these stories, tiny flames flickering atop graves that haven't been attended in decades. One longtime local, Margaret, recounted walking through the older section one foggy evening and seeing several graves glowing faintly. She approached, expecting perhaps to find a family vigil or a memorial service, but the graves were empty. The candles burned steadily in the chill night air, their flames casting elongated shadows across the tombstones. When she stepped closer, the lights would flicker, as if reacting to her presence, and then vanish altogether. Visitors also frequently report the sensation of being touched by unseen hands. Teenagers testing their courage often tell stories of hair being brushed or shoulders tapped when no one is behind them. One man named Thomas, an amateur historian, described his experience while photographing the cemetery at night. As he knelt to capture an image of a weathered tomb, he suddenly felt a cold hand brush across the back of his neck. He jumped to his feet and spun around. Nothing was there. The air was empty, still, and silent. Yet the sensation lingered as though the touch had left a trace on his very skin. Shadows moved differently at Oddfellows Cemetery than anywhere else. People describe them darting between tombstones at impossible speeds, cutting across the paths like they are alive. Some say these shadows are the remnants of past Oddfellows, their spirits still performing rituals or maintaining watch over their fellow members. Others believe the shadows are more sinister, manifestations of the energy trapped in the cemetery from decades of secretive ceremonies. Witnesses claim these figures are rarely fully visible, sometimes only a flash of black moving across the corner of the eye. Other times, a silhouette that vanishes when attention is focused directly on it. One particularly unnerving account comes from a group of local paranormal investigators. They entered the cemetery around midnight with cameras, EMF detectors, and audio recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the strange occurrences that have long been reported. They walked through the oldest section, their flashlights cutting swaths of light through the thick darkness. Suddenly, one of them noticed small flames appearing atop 3 graves simultaneously. The group rushed to the location, but the flames had disappeared, leaving no sign of candle wax or any material capable of producing fire. At the same moment, their cameras began to flicker, and on one of the audio devices, faint chanting could be heard, low and rhythmic, almost as if reciting fragments of an unknown prayer. The investigators left immediately, shaken and convinced that Oddfellows Cemetery harbored energies beyond human comprehension. Folklore suggests that the Oddfellows performed secretive rituals intended to honor the dead and strengthen the bonds between living members. Over time, some believe that these rituals left residual energy within the cemetery, a spiritual imprint that now manifests in these eerie ways. Others theorize that the cemetery is a thin point between the worlds, where the boundary separating the living from the dead is unusually fragile. Whatever the explanation, the common thread in witness reports is a feeling of being watched, never threatened directly, but observed, as though the unseen entities are assessing who dares to walk their ground. Some visitors have tried to rationalize the experiences. They suggest wind flickering through hollowed candle holders, stray animals brushing past, or shadows cast by streetlights as the cause of the phenomena. Yet these explanations fail to account for the consistency and specificity of the accounts. Candles appear in unlit graves, hands are felt with no source, and shadows move far faster than any human could. Multiple witnesses have described almost identical experiences across decades, lending credence to the idea that something genuinely unusual resides in Oddfellows Cemetery. Even those who visit during the day occasionally sense something is off. A local teacher, visiting the cemetery to photograph monuments for a history project, recalled feeling a strange chill pass over her as she walked past a cluster of graves. The air felt heavy, and for a moment, she swore she saw a shadow move across the path in the corner of her eye. When she turned fully, there was nothing, only the sunlit headstones standing still as if mocking her perception. Many who have returned after dusk report that the sense of unease during the day is only amplified at night, suggesting that the cemetery holds a dual existence, one peaceful and visible, the other dark and intangible. Another compelling story involves a man named Eric, who entered Oddfellows Cemetery one late autumn evening to clear brush along the paths. As he worked, he noticed a cloaked figure standing motionless near a row of older graves. Eric assumed it was a visitor, but as he approached, the figure glided silently between the tombstones, moving faster than any human could. When he reached the same spot, the figure had vanished completely, leaving behind only the faint smell of wax and old wood. Eric left immediately, convinced that he had encountered the lingering presence of a long-dead member of the order. Over the years, Oddfellows Cemetery has attracted historians, thrill-seekers, and paranormal investigators alike. Despite warnings, people continue to visit after dark, drawn by curiosity and the promise of witnessing something inexplicable. Most leave with stories of unseen hands, flickering candles, and shadows that move with a life of their own. The cemetery's reputation as a place of strange rituals and lingering spirits only grows, as each new visitor adds their experiences to the long list of unexplained events. Bellevue Cemetery in Danville is a place of quiet reflection by day, with its sprawling lawns, ornate headstones, and towering trees creating an atmosphere of solemn beauty. Visitors often come to pay their respects, walk the paths, or photograph the historic tombs. Yet beneath its serene surface lies a history laced with eerie occurrences. The cemetery, particularly its mausoleums and crypts, has earned a reputation among locals for strange sightings and unexplained phenomena that have persisted for generations. One of the most commonly reported experiences involves the whispers. People who walk alone through the older sections of Bellevue Cemetery, especially near the crypts, often hear their names called. The voices are soft and almost melodic, carrying over the gravel paths as if coming from inside the stone structures themselves. Many visitors initially assume it is a prank or the trick of the wind moving through the mausoleum vents. But when they stop and look around, there is no one, and the whispers continue, growing closer, yet always remaining just out of reach. The cemetery's crypts, built from heavy stone and glass, hold a particular fascination for those who believe in the supernatural. Numerous accounts describe ghostly faces appearing pressed against the glass, staring out at the living with hollow or sorrowful expressions. Some witnesses claim the faces belong to children, their eyes wide and mournful, while others see adults, often cloaked in the fashions of the 19th century. One visitor, a history enthusiast named Jonathan, recounted a chilling experience. He paused at one mausoleum to admire the intricate carvings when he suddenly saw a face pressed against the thick glass. It was a woman, her features pale and still, staring directly at him. As he blinked, she vanished, leaving only the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. The caretaker of Bellevue Cemetery has shared some of the most unsettling accounts. For decades, he maintained the grounds and watched over the crypts, and he often spoke of figures sitting silently on the benches along the winding paths. He described the apparitions as motionless, almost statuesque, observing visitors without moving. Sometimes they appeared to be mourning, other times simply waiting. He said that the presence would vanish only when the living left, as if the spirits respected a certain boundary. Yet those who lingered too long often felt watched, a sensation that intensified with each step closer to the crypts. Ghost hunters who have explored Bellevue Cemetery report a consistent set of phenomena. Electronic devices often fail near the mausoleums, cameras flicker inexplicably, and audio recorders capture faint, unintelligible murmurs. One investigation team recorded sounds resembling conversations, though no humans were present, and the voices seemed to echo from inside the stone crypts themselves. Footsteps have also been reported in the gravel, sometimes pacing in circles or following visitors along the paths, yet no one else is seen. Many claim these footsteps grow louder as curiosity drives them closer to the tombs, then stop abruptly when attention is fully focused. Some visitors have recounted being physically touched or brushed by invisible hands. While such encounters are fleeting, they leave a lasting impression, and those who experience them often speak of a cold, almost damp sensation, as though the hands belonged to someone long deceased. One woman, walking near the southern crypts on a foggy evening, described feeling a hand lightly grasp her shoulder. She turned quickly, but the path was empty. The sensation lingered, accompanied by a shiver that ran down her spine, and a sense that she had been gently warned to move along. The history of Bellevue Cemetery may offer a glimpse into the origins of these hauntings. Established in the 1800s, it is the final resting place for many of Danville's earliest residents, including prominent families, veterans, and local leaders. Its mausoleums were built with care, often featuring elaborate stonework and stained glass, reflecting the reverence of the era. Some researchers suggest that the spirits of those interred may have formed strong attachments to their resting places. their devotion or unrest manifesting in the unusual experiences reported by visitors. Others believe that tragedies or untimely deaths contribute to a residual energy that lingers within the stone crypts, echoing into the present. The architecture of the crypts themselves seems to amplify the supernatural activity. Thick walls, enclosed spaces, and the reflective glass create a labyrinth of light and shadow. Observers report that faces can appear at any angle, sometimes at eye level, sometimes floating above or behind the stone barriers. The effect is disorienting, as if the living are glimpsing another world through a thin barrier. Many visitors have left the cemetery feeling a mix of awe and unease, haunted by the fleeting impressions of faces they cannot fully comprehend. In addition to visual and auditory experiences, many speak of an emotional weight in the older sections of the cemetery. A quiet melancholy seems to settle over those who linger near the mausoleums, an almost tangible sorrow that permeates the air. Some interpret this as empathy for the spirits. Others as the cemetery's own memory of grief, preserved in stone and earth. Even casual walkers often report a heavy stillness, a sense of being observed by more than just the trees or the headstones. On rare occasions, people claim to see entire apparitions wandering the grounds. Cloaked figures, sometimes indistinct in shape, move slowly between the graves or sit motionless on benches. These figures never speak, and their movements are deliberate, almost ritualistic. They seem to exist in a parallel rhythm to the living world, observing, waiting, or simply remaining present. One local historian remarked that these sightings are reminiscent of the caretakers and mourners of old spirits still fulfilling roles they held in life, even after death. Despite the chilling accounts, Bellevue Cemetery continues to be maintained and visited. Its crypts and tombs attract historians, photographers, and those intrigued by the paranormal. By day, it remains a place of reflection, but after dusk, it transforms into something otherworldly. Those who enter after dark often do so with a mixture of curiosity and caution, aware that the whispers, the faces, and the unseen watchers may greet them at any moment. Old Catholic Cemetery in Bardstown is a historic resting place that holds centuries of stories within its stone walls. Its rows of weathered headstones, many engraved with dates from the 18th and 19th centuries, stretch across gently rolling hills. During the day, the cemetery exudes a calm, almost reverent atmosphere. Sunlight filters through tall oaks and maples, highlighting the intricate carvings on the graves and illuminating the pathways that wind between them. The most well-known legend involves a priest who lived in Bardstown during the mid-1800s. Historical records tell of a devastating flood that swept through the town, threatening lives and property alike. According to local lore, the priest devoted himself to helping the townspeople, guiding them to safety and performing last rites for those who perished. Ultimately, he lost his own life to the rising waters, and his death became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Over time, the story of his devotion became intertwined with whispers of his continued presence within Old Catholic Cemetery. Visitors who explore the cemetery at night often report seeing a figure in traditional priestly robes, pacing solemnly among the graves. The figure moves with a deliberate, almost ritualistic rhythm, as though performing a duty that cannot end. Some say he stops near certain graves, bowing his head or raising his hands as if offering silent prayers. One witness, a local historian, described encountering him near an old family plot late one evening. The historian had been photographing the headstones when he noticed a shadow moving along the path. At first, he assumed it was another visitor, but as the figure came closer, he realized the robes were unmistakably those of a Catholic priest. The figure glanced briefly in his direction and continued pacing, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had appeared. Accompanying these sightings are reports of hearing the priest's voice, faint, sorrowful, and urgent. Visitors claim that when they walk through the older sections of the cemetery, they can hear him giving sermons, speaking words that are indistinct but charged with emotion. Some describe the voice as imploring, urging the living to remember those who have passed or to heed unseen warnings. Others report hearing prayers whispered over graves. the cadence slow and deliberate, echoing faintly across the quiet grounds. The sounds are never loud, but they carry a weight that seems to press on the listener's chest, stirring both awe and unease. Beyond the priest himself, the cemetery is said to be filled with other signs of the supernatural. Shadows move unnaturally between the headstones, disappearing when observers turn their heads. Cold spots form near certain graves, sending shivers through those who linger too long. On foggy nights, some visitors have described an eerie glow rising from the older plots, as if the spirits themselves were illuminated in spectral light. Those who enter alone often report feeling the sensation of being watched, the gaze of unseen eyes following their movements along the paths. One particularly chilling experience was shared by a group of college students who dared to spend the night in the cemetery. They arrived after dark, equipped with flashlights and cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the legends. Around midnight, they reported hearing the priest's voice clearly for the first time. It was a soft, sorrowful murmur, repeating the same phrase over and over. One of the students, curious and unnerved, followed the sound to a small cluster of graves near the center of the cemetery. As he approached, he saw a figure in a flowing robe pacing slowly between the headstones. When he called out, the figure paused, turned, and vanished into the darkness. The students fled shortly afterward, convinced that the cemetery held more than just memory and stone. Historical researchers suggest that the events described by visitors may stem from a combination of fact and folklore. The priest's heroic actions during the flood were well documented, and it is clear he left a lasting impact on the community. Yet the consistency of eyewitness accounts over decades of the pacing figure, the sorrowful voice, and the sense of a watchful presence has lent credibility to the idea that Old Catholic Cemetery is more than a resting place for the dead. Some theorize that the priest's devotion, combined with the traumatic circumstances of his death, created a spiritual imprint that continues to manifest for those who enter the grounds. The cemetery's architecture adds to its eerie atmosphere. Tall iron gates creak in the wind, and narrow paths weave between rows of tombstones, some leaning and cracked with age. The older graves are particularly evocative, with carved angels and saints whose faces seem to follow visitors, lending an almost sentient quality to the cemetery itself. During autumn, when the wind rustles dry leaves across the cobblestones, the effect is heightened, a combination of visual, auditory, and emotional cues that make the presence of the past nearly tangible. Visitors also report a distinct emotional response when encountering the priest or witnessing other phenomena. Many describe a sudden heaviness in the chest, a mixture of reverence and fear, or an overwhelming sense of sorrow and compassion. Some have left offerings, candles, flowers, or written prayers in the hope of acknowledging the spirit's vigilance. Others, however, have fled the cemetery in terror, feeling that the lingering presence demanded respect or recognition that they were unprepared to give. Even during daylight hours, there is an undeniable aura that permeates Old Catholic Cemetery. The sun's warmth does little to dispel the feeling that the grounds are watched, and the shadows cast by ancient trees create subtle shapes that seem almost human. Longtime residents insist that the cemetery is alive in its own way, holding not only the memory of the dead but the devotion of those who once served them in life. Ashland Cemetery in Lexington is a historic burial ground, nestled among gently rolling hills and shaded by tall, ancient trees. By day, it appears serene and contemplative, with winding paths that invite quiet reflection. Families visit the graves of loved ones, historians study the old monuments, and the air carries the faint scent of flowers left in remembrance. The tombstones themselves range from small, weathered markers to grand monuments, each one telling a story of lives lived long ago. Yet, as dusk settles over Ashland Cemetery, the atmosphere changes. Shadows deepen, the temperature seems to drop, and those who remain often speak of a presence that cannot be explained by history or imagination alone. The most commonly reported apparition at Ashland Cemetery is that of a spectral lady who appears at twilight. Witnesses describe her as tall and elegant, her form ethereal and slightly translucent, with long hair that flows around her shoulders. She is usually seen wearing a dress that seems worn and tattered at the edges, as if it has survived decades, even centuries, of time. The figure glides silently along the cemetery paths, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, pausing occasionally at particular graves. Her face, pale and mournful, often appears fixed in an expression of sorrow, as though she is searching for someone who is no longer there. Several visitors recount encountering her during evening walks through the cemetery. One witness describes seeing her moving along a tree-lined path, just as the sun was disappearing behind the horizon. The fading light cast long shadows among the tombstones, and the lady appeared to emerge from the shadows themselves. When approached, she did not flee in the manner of a startled human, but seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving only a faint chill and the lingering sensation of being watched. Others report similar experiences, noting that her presence is accompanied by an inexplicable heaviness in the atmosphere, as if the air itself carries the weight of her sorrow. The spectral lady is not always passive. Some visitors claim to hear her whispering names, words that are faint and unintelligible, carried on a breeze that seems to move with intention. A few have reported hearing soft sobs, delicate yet heartrending, echoing along empty paths. These sounds often appear to come from a specific direction, as though guiding the living toward an unseen destination or a grave long forgotten. Those who have followed the whispers describe a growing sense of unease, the feeling that they are walking among memories and emotions too potent to remain hidden, yet too elusive to fully comprehend. Several theories exist about the identity of the spectral lady at Ashland Cemetery. Some believe she may be the spirit of a woman who lived in the area during the 19th century, perhaps mourning a lost family member or a lover who died tragically. Others speculate that she is a residual spirit, a form of energy imprinted on the cemetery itself, replaying moments of grief over and over for anyone who enters her space. Local folklore suggests that she is protective of certain graves, and that those who linger too long risk drawing her attention, sometimes feeling watched even when she is not visible. Fog or mist sometimes settles in low areas, softening outlines and creating the illusion of movement among the graves. Even minor sounds, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, can be interpreted as signs of her presence, amplifying the visitor's sense of unease. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile elements makes her apparition a particularly immersive encounter for those who witness it. Accounts also describe a physical sensation that accompanies her presence. Many report a sudden chill, a drop in temperature that seems localized around where the spectral lady appears. Some feel the faint brush of a hand or a gentle tug at clothing, fleeting yet unmistakable. These sensations often leave visitors startled, with a heightened awareness of their surroundings, and a lingering sense of being accompanied, even when no one else is visible. The effect is subtle but persistent, an unshakable impression that the cemetery is alive in ways that are not immediately understandable. The spectral lady has left a lasting impression on the community. Stories of her appearance are passed down through local lore, shared among visitors, historians, and those interested in the paranormal. Some are drawn to the cemetery out of curiosity, hoping for a glimpse or an experience that cannot be explained. Others avoid the grounds at dusk, wary of encountering her or feeling the weight of her sorrow. In every case, her presence reinforces the notion that Ashland Cemetery is more than a resting place for the dead. It is a repository of memory, emotion, and lingering history. Despite the fear or unease she inspires, many also describe a sense of melancholy beauty in her presence. The spectral lady embodies the persistence of grief, the echo of love and loss carried across time, and the delicate connection between the living and the dead. Visitors often leave the cemetery with a mixture of awe and apprehension, the memory of her apparition lingering long after they have returned to the world of the living. Hillview Cemetery in Louisville is a sprawling historic burial ground, known for its rows of weathered headstones, towering trees, and quiet, winding paths. By day, the cemetery appears calm and solemn, a place for reflection and remembrance, where families visit the graves of loved ones, and historians study the monuments that record decades of lives lived. The gentle slopes, old mausoleums, and shaded walkways create a serene atmosphere, inviting visitors to wander slowly and absorb the weight of history. Yet, as evening falls and the sun dips behind the horizon, Hillview Cemetery transforms. The tranquility of daylight gives way to an eerie stillness, and those who remain after dark often report strange occurrences that hint at the cemetery's reputation as one of Louisville's most haunted locations. One of the most frequently reported phenomena at Hillview Cemetery is the sound of laughter echoing through the empty sections of the grounds. This laughter is rarely loud or boisterous, often described as faint, distant, and hauntingly distorted. Visitors recount walking along quiet pathways when they suddenly hear the sound, a high, childlike giggle, or the low murmur of adult voices bouncing off tombstones and mausoleums in ways that seem impossible for any human source. The laughter often appears to move around the cemetery, coming from multiple directions simultaneously, and just as suddenly as it begins, it fades into silence. Those who experience it report an unsettling mix of fear and fascination, as though the cemetery itself is alive with unseen observers. Mausoleums within Hillview Cemetery are another focus of paranormal activity. Doors that have remained closed for decades are said to open and close on their own, creaking softly in the quiet night air. Visitors report approaching these structures after hearing the sound, only to find the doors swinging gently or slamming shut, with no explanation or visible cause. Some accounts describe the doors opening to reveal shadows moving inside, as though unseen figures are pacing the interior, watching the living from behind opaque glass or stone. The combination of the sound and movement is unnerving, reinforcing the sense that the cemetery is inhabited by entities who interact subtly with anyone present. Shadow figures are among the most persistent and chilling reports at Hillview. Visitors often describe humanoid forms gliding silently between the graves, sometimes stopping at particular headstones or mausoleums before continuing on their way. These figures are rarely fully visible, their outlines blurred or indistinct, yet their movements appear purposeful, deliberate, as if they are retracing steps from long ago. One man recounted an especially vivid encounter. Walking along a secluded path, he saw a pale, ghostly woman moving slowly among the graves. Her face was indistinct in the moonlight, and her dress appeared to flow as though caught in an invisible breeze. When he tried to approach her, she vanished as if dissolving into the shadows, leaving only a lingering sense of presence and the faint rustle of fabric in the air. The atmospheric conditions of Hillview Cemetery at night often amplify these experiences. Tall trees cast long shadows over the gravestones, creating dark pockets where movement is hard to track and shapes seem to shift. Fog frequently settles into the lower areas, muting sound and making the familiar paths appear distorted or unfamiliar. Even a gentle breeze can create subtle noises, a creaking branch, the flutter of leaves, the distant tapping of a headstone, which can be interpreted as evidence of supernatural activity. Together, these elements create an environment where the boundary between the living and the dead feels thin, and where the smallest sound or movement can take on an unsettling significance. The history of Hillview Cemetery may provide some context for these hauntings. The cemetery is home to generations of Louisville residents, including prominent figures, local families, and long-forgotten members of the community. Many of the graves date back to the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the mausoleums and monuments reflect both the wealth and the devotion of those interred. Some believe that the energy of past lives remains embedded in the grounds, a residual presence that manifests in subtle but unmistakable ways. Others suggest that certain spirits are more active than others, drawn to areas of emotional significance or to the living who wander near. Visitors who encounter the unusual activity at Hillview Cemetery often describe a profound sense of awe, tinged with fear. The laughter echoing through empty sections, the movement of shadowy figures, and the doors that open and close on their own all create a dynamic, haunting environment. Even brief encounters leave a lasting impression, a sense that the cemetery is not merely a resting place for the dead, but a living repository of memory, emotion, and energy. Some return repeatedly, drawn by curiosity or a desire to experience the unexplained, while others leave quickly, unsettled by the presence they cannot fully understand. Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery in Bellevue is a small, secluded burial ground, quietly tucked away behind overgrown trees and shrubs that shield it from the modern world. By day, the cemetery appears abandoned and forgotten, with withered tombstones leaning precariously and grass growing wild among the graves. The worn paths are often difficult to follow, and many visitors remark on the silence that hangs over the grounds, broken only by the occasional bird call or rustle of leaves. Yet beneath this quiet exterior, Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery holds an unsettling presence, a sense of lingering energy that has inspired stories and sightings among those who dare to explore its grounds. Locals and visitors alike have reported hearing faint bells ringing in the cemetery, even though no church or bell tower stands nearby. The sound is soft, almost melodic, drifting across the graves in the evening air. Some say the bells toll sporadically, their chimes echoing unpredictably, while others claim they hear a continuous, faint ringing that seems to guide them deeper into the cemetery. The source of the sound is never visible, and those who investigate often find nothing more than the swaying branches of trees or the occasional squirrel moving among the headstones. Yet the bells continue to sound, persistent and haunting, giving the impression that the cemetery itself is alive, calling attention to unseen presences among the graves. Shadowy figures are another phenomenon frequently reported at Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery. Visitors have described seeing dark silhouettes kneeling or bowing beside unmarked graves, often motionless yet distinctly humanoid. These figures are usually seen in the corners of one's vision, vanishing when looked at directly, leaving only the impression of movement or the faint outline of a body. Some witnesses claim to have seen multiple figures at once, silently tending to graves, their presence heavy with a sense of sorrow or devotion. The eerie stillness surrounding them amplifies the unsettling feeling, as though the cemetery is occupied by spirits who refuse to rest and remain bound to the site through unresolved matters or lingering grief. The cemetery has also become known for strange occurrences involving personal belongings. Several visitors have reported that items they carried, keys, wallets, or small trinkets, mysteriously disappear from their pockets or bags while walking among the graves. After moments of searching in panic, the objects often reappear inside the mausoleum or atop an abandoned gravestone, with no explanation for how they traveled or why. Some theorists suggest that these incidents are the result of playful spirits or entities attempting to communicate with the living. Others view the events as more ominous, evidence of a restless presence asserting itself over the living who wander too far into the cemetery as forgotten corners. Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery's isolation contributes to the intensity of these experiences. The overgrown vegetation, uneven terrain, and lack of modern lighting create a setting where shadows loom larger, sounds echo more eerily, and every movement feels amplified. Fog often settles into the low-lying areas, softening the shapes of headstones and creating illusions of motion where none exists. Even the wind behaves unpredictably in the cemetery, rustling through the trees and whistling between tombstones in ways that seem almost deliberate. All of these elements combine to make visitors acutely aware of their surroundings, heightening both anticipation and fear. Despite its small size, Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery is layered with history. The graves range from early settlers to families that shaped the town of Bellevue, with unmarked and weather-worn plots revealing lives that have been all but forgotten. Some believe that the bells, the kneeling figures, and the inexplicable movements of personal belongings are tied to the spirits of these early inhabitants, expressing a desire to be remembered or to make their presence known to the living. Others speculate that the cemetery itself acts as a kind of magnet for energy, drawing paranormal activity due to the density of emotion and history embedded in the grounds over the decades. Encounters in Bellevue Pioneer Cemetery are often described as both unnerving and mesmerizing. The combination of sound, shadow, and subtle interaction with the living creates an atmosphere that feels profoundly otherworldly. Visitors frequently leave with the sense that they have glimpsed a world that exists alongside their own. A space where time and mortality are fluid, and where spirits continue to occupy the ground long after their bodies have decayed. Richmond Cemetery in Richmond is a historic burial ground with a reputation for quiet solemnity by day and chilling activity by night. Its well-kept paths, aged trees, and rows of weathered headstones give visitors a sense of the city's past, a tangible connection to the lives of those who came before. Families still visit the newer plots to pay respects, while historians and local researchers often wander among the older stones, drawn by the weight of history. Yet beyond the orderly appearance of the cemetery lies an unmarked section, a part of the grounds that few dare to explore, where whispers of the past linger and a sense of unease pervades the air. This unmarked section of Richmond Cemetery is said to hold the victims of a smallpox outbreak from the early 1800s, a time when the disease claimed countless lives with little chance of survival. The graves here are unmarked, lost to memory and time, leaving only the suggestion of where bodies might lie beneath the earth. Locals claim that the spirits of these victims have never found peace. Visitors who wander near this section after sunset report hearing faint whispers, almost inaudible at first, but growing clearer with each step. The voices are often accompanied by the sound of coughing, as if the dead themselves are struggling for breath, replaying the final moments of their suffering in a spectral echo. Many visitors describe an oppressive atmosphere in this part of the cemetery, a heaviness that presses down on the chest and slows the breath. The fog often gathers here, dense and clinging to the ground, muting sound and obscuring vision. Shapes and shadows take on unfamiliar forms in the mist, and even the most familiar paths can feel disorienting. Those who have ventured into the area late at night report a deep sense of vulnerability, as though the living are intruding on a world that is not theirs to enter. The air feels charged, thick with unseen presence, and the faint murmurs and coughs seem to respond to those who linger too long, growing louder, closer, and more insistent. One of the most commonly reported phenomena in Richmond Cemetery's unmarked section is the sighting of ghostly children. Witnesses have described fleeting images of small figures moving among the fog, often crying or calling out before vanishing entirely. One woman recounted an especially haunting experience. Walking through the cemetery in the late evening, she noticed a small child sitting on the ground, hunched and sobbing. The child's face was pale, eyes wide with sorrow, and its tiny shoulders shook with silent anguish. When the woman approached, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving behind a small puddle of tears glistening on the damp earth. The image lingered in her mind long after she left, a reminder of the lives lost to disease and the enduring sorrow that seemed to inhabit the cemetery. Other visitors have reported hearing faint footsteps, trailing behind them, only to find the paths empty when they turn. Some claim to feel a sudden coldness or a touch on their shoulder, flitting and light, as if a restless spirit has brushed against them. The combination of these experiences, whispers, coughing, ghostly figures, and tactile sensations, creates a chilling, immersive environment for anyone who ventures into this part of Richmond Cemetery. Even those who arrive with skepticism often leave with a sense of profound unease, aware that they have encountered something beyond ordinary understanding. The history of the cemetery reinforces these accounts. Richmond Cemetery has been in use for centuries, and a smallpox outbreak that claimed so many lives left an indelible mark on the community. The victims, buried without markers in a hasty effort to contain the disease, represent a population denied recognition in death. The unmarked section stands as a silent testament to the tragedy, and many believe that the lingering spirits are tied to this injustice, replaying their final moments and seeking acknowledgement from the living. Paranormal investigators have noted unusual energy readings in the area, and recordings sometimes capture faint, unexplained voices, further lending credence to the reports of ordinary visitors. For those who wander through Richmond Cemetery after dark, the unmarked section offers an experience that is equal parts terrifying and sobering. The whispers, coughing, and spectral figures create a sense of immediacy, as if the past is pressing in on the present. Every shadow seems alive, every rustle of leaves amplified, and the fog transforms the familiar cemetery landscape into an alien world where reality and the supernatural intersect. The lingering sorrow of the victims, combined with the unexplained phenomena, leaves a lasting impression on anyone who dares to enter. Winchester Cemetery in Winchester is a historic burial ground. Its quiet paths and aged headstones stretching across gently rolling hills. By day, the cemetery exudes a peaceful, reflective atmosphere, with families visiting loved ones and locals exploring the old stones that mark centuries of history. Tall trees line the pathways, their branches casting shadows over the graves, while sunlight filters through the leaves, illuminating inscriptions worn by time. Yet beneath this serene exterior, Winchester Cemetery holds a darker presence, one that becomes especially apparent as dusk falls and the grounds take on a different character. The cemetery has long been associated with spectral soldiers, figures said to appear along the rows of graves, replaying scenes from a long-past era of conflict. Witnesses often describe seeing soldiers in uniform walking silently between headstones, rifles slung across their backs, their movements deliberate and precise. These figures are said to appear mostly during the evening or in the dim light of early morning, sometimes standing at attention near specific graves or pacing slowly along the cobblestone paths. Visitors report that the soldiers' uniforms are detailed and historically accurate, with some appearing to be from the Civil War era, complete with period-appropriate hats and gear. Their faces, however, are often shadowed or indistinct, adding to their spectral appearance, and they vanish or blur into the surroundings when approached too closely, leaving only the sense that they were never truly of this world. Accompanying the appearance of the spectral soldiers are unusual sounds that seem to echo across the cemetery. Some visitors report hearing faint cannon fire or musket shots, even though no battles have occurred in the area for over a century. The sounds are distant and muffled, yet distinct enough to cause unease. Other witnesses describe the creak of boots on cobblestone or gravel, sometimes accompanied by murmured commands or low conversations that vanish when one turns to investigate. These auditory phenomena, combined with the visual sightings of soldiers, create an immersive, unsettling environment, making it difficult to distinguish between memory, imagination, and reality. The spectral soldiers are not always stationary. Some visitors recount seeing figures marching in formation between rows of graves, moving with a military precision that is both mesmerizing and haunting. In several accounts, the soldiers pause at particular graves, sometimes standing silently as if paying tribute to the deceased, before resuming their march and fading into the shadows. These moments have left a lasting impression on those who witnessed them, evoking both fear and awe at the persistence of history within the cemetery. Environmental factors in Winchester Cemetery often enhance these experiences. Mist frequently gathers in the low-lying areas, curling around tombstones and obscuring vision, creating the perfect conditions for fleeting glimpses of movement or shadow. Even the wind seems to behave differently among the graves, rustling leaves in ways that mimic whispers or distant murmurs. For those walking the cemetery at night, these subtle details combine to heighten the sense of another presence, making it feel as though the cemetery itself is alive with memories of conflict. The history of Winchester Cemetery provides context for the spectral sightings. The grounds are the final resting place for veterans of numerous wars, including the Civil War, which shaped much of the region's history. Many of the soldiers buried here were young men who died far from home or in battle, and the cemetery's rows of graves reflect the toll of war on the community. Some believe that the spectral soldiers are the lingering spirits of these men, drawn back to the cemetery by unfinished business, a sense of duty, or the weight of their untimely deaths. Others suggest that the appearances are residual energy, echoes of the past replaying over the land where these men once served. Encounters in Winchester Cemetery leave a profound impact on visitors. Those who witness the soldiers or hear the distant sounds of battle often speak of an intense mixture of fear, reverence, and melancholy. The cemetery becomes a living history lesson, where the boundaries between past and present blur, and where the sacrifices of long-dead soldiers are felt in a tangible, visceral way. Even skeptics often leave unsettled, aware that something unusual resides among the graves, a presence that defies conventional explanation. Prospect Hill Cemetery in Lexington is a historic and sprawling burial ground, widely recognized as the oldest cemetery in the city. Its gently rolling hills, shaded paths, and centuries-old headstones tell the story of generations long past. Families of early settlers, prominent local figures, and ordinary townspeople alike are buried within its grounds, their names etched in weathered stone, some nearly illegible with age. By day, the cemetery presents a quiet, contemplative setting, with sunlight filtering through tall trees and the rustle of leaves accompanying those who stroll along the narrow paths. But as dusk falls and shadows lengthen, Prospect Hill Cemetery transforms into a place of whispered warnings and inexplicable activity, drawing both curious visitors and those intrigued by the paranormal. The cemetery is widely known for sightings of ghostly figures dressed in clothing from the 18th century. Witnesses have reported seeing men in tri-cornered hats and long coats, women in long flowing dresses with bonnets, moving silently among the graves. These apparitions are usually fleeting, appearing in the corner of one's vision, only to vanish when directly observed. Some claim to have seen these figures pausing at particular tombstones, staring down at the earth as if mourning a long-forgotten loss, before continuing along their spectral paths. Others describe the figures as walking the cemetery's main avenues in deliberate patterns, almost as if they are retracing steps from a life that ended centuries ago. Visitors often report sudden cold spots, pockets of frigid air that seem to materialize without warning. These chills are most frequently encountered near the older sections of the cemetery, where the earliest settlers are buried. People describe feeling as though they are being watched, a heavy presence lingering just beyond sight. Some claim to have experienced a sense of being followed, with the sensation growing stronger the longer they remain in the cemetery after dark. Locals caution that the spirits of Prospect Hill are particularly restless, and those who linger too long may find themselves the target of unseen attention. The lingering energy of the past pressing in from all sides. Another commonly reported phenomenon is the sound of rattling chains. Some visitors swear they hear the metallic clinking of shackles or chains moving along the ground, echoing eerily through the cemetery's empty paths. The noise is irregular, sometimes accompanied by a faint, dragging sound, as though invisible footsteps are moving deliberately between graves. The origin of these sounds is never seen, and those who investigate often find only still air and untouched tombstones. Some paranormal enthusiasts speculate that the rattling chains are connected to the restless spirits of those who suffered injustice, possibly victims of slavery or imprisonment from early Lexington history. Though no conclusive evidence exists, fog and mist often settle into the older sections of Prospect Hill Cemetery, amplifying the eerie atmosphere. Under the cover of fog, the headstones appear to shift in the dim light. Shadows stretch unnaturally across the ground, and the distant sounds of wind or rustling leaves take on a more sinister tone. Even minor movements, a branch swaying, the crunch of gravel underfoot, are exaggerated in the fog, sometimes creating the impression of figures moving in places where none exist. Many visitors report that the fog seems almost sentient, curling around them and guiding their movements, further intensifying the feeling that the cemetery itself is alive with unseen presences. Historical context adds to the weight of Prospect Hill Cemetery's hauntings. The cemetery has witnessed centuries of life, death, and human suffering. It holds the graves of early settlers, Revolutionary War veterans, and families who shaped Lexington in its earliest days. Some believe that the intensity of human emotion, grief, sorrow, fear, and loss has imprinted itself on the grounds, creating a residual energy that manifests as ghostly figures and unexplained phenomena. Others suggest that specific spirits remain active, drawn to those who wander the cemetery after dark, compelled to interact with the living in ways that are sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, and always unsettling. Many visitors have shared chilling personal experiences. Some report seeing figures silently observing them from behind tombstones, only to vanish when approached. Others recount hearing whispers carried on the wind, though no other person is present. A few have felt sudden touches on their shoulders or back, light and fleeting, as if someone invisible is brushing past them. For those who encounter the rattling chains, the experience is often accompanied by a deep sense of dread, an impression that the cemetery's past is reaching out in the present. Prospect Hill Cemetery is more than a resting place for the dead. It is a living repository of history and lingering emotion. The ghostly figures in 18th century clothing, the cold spots, and the sounds of chains all serve as reminders that the cemetery's past continues to exist alongside the present. Visitors leave with a heightened awareness of the passage of time, the fragility of life, and the lingering presence of those who came before. Kentucky's graveyards are more than resting places for the dead. They are living memories, haunted by the sorrow, fear, and unfinished stories of those who came before. Whether it's the ghostly soldiers marching silently, spectral women wandering lonely paths, or whispers carried on the wind, these cemeteries remind us that some spirits refuse to rest. So the next time you walk among the headstones after dark, remember, in Kentucky, the past is never truly buried, and sometimes it follows you home.